Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 18 of the 13th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, and this is the only weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. So this is a special bonus episode of the podcast, and it's a conversation I had with the wonderful Brian Ruskin of the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review podcast. And regular listeners will recognize that name as being Pete Nestor's show. Well, I finally got the other half of the dream team onto the podcast. And this one is going to be an interesting one, as the music Brian makes is it's a long way removed from the rock and roll that I would guess is the main sort of genre that most of us listen to. But I did grow up as a little keyboard nerd. I've kind of been into this before. So I listened to a lot of synth and electronic music as a kid or as a teenager, as well as, the Sabbath and Queen and the Kinks and that kind of stuff and the Beatles that I devoured. And so I wanted to get Brian on to talk about electronic music. His new album, The Echoes I Sent, is a seriously impressive piece of work, and we dive headlong into it, as well as discussing the first of his albums that I checked out, which is titled Far Above the World Tonight. And we talk about how discovering that album specifically and Brian's music unlocked a part of my musical brain that I didn't even know existed. How we talked about how messing around with synths as a kid is just a whole lot of fun, and sort of uninhibited. How you compose using loops and samples and DAWs, how you use found sounds and all sorts of wild and wonderful techniques and approaches that are very different to the live in the studio approach that we're more used to with Tom's music. It's a slightly longer episode because Brian was absolutely brilliant in articulating his creative process and his background in getting to this stage of his creative life. So where this album comes from and maybe a little bit of where things are going. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Brian Ruskin, also known as Mental Health Consumer.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
Okay, so we met through your podcast. Well, I say met, and I've met your co-host Pete Nestor, but we met through your podcast. Tell me about Honest and Unmerciful, a record review podcast.
It is an honest and unmerciful record review podcast. So that's an interesting story. Pete Nestor and I go way back. We were in school together, grad school, and just sort of had a shared love of music. And, as one does, sometimes you go to these parties and you're like, it's loud and you're trying to have a conversation and, hey, what's your 5 favorite albums of all time? That kind of thing. Oh man, this is totally an overrated album, underrated. So we always had those conversations. Pete and I have a lot of, I used to joke with him about our synergies. We have a lot of shared interests and shared perspectives on things, but also different views. And that's exciting too. We're not clones. Nonetheless, that sort of out of those just friendly musical conversations, I guess it must have been during a time when he and I were in very different places. I think he was overseas on an assignment and I was back in the States, and we just started bouncing around like a back and forth a spreadsheet of like, hey, check this song out or this video. And he did the same with me and I did with him. We did that for a while, and it was kind of nice just to keep that connection since we weren't seeing each other in person at all, or even really chatting. This was probably days before Zoom and WhatsApp and all of that was more commonplace. So it then come COVID time, so it was 2020, we were both back in the United States, I should say, for your international listeners. And we thought, well, we should try that again. Well, wouldn't it be fun to have a podcast? Everyone's doing it. Why don't we do it? Why not us? And so, of course, we were like, well, what should we do it on? And how is this going to go? And lots of scheming and theming until we just sort of settled on the theme. But Honest and Unmerciful was going to be about music that interested us. And it didn't really matter the genre, but probably more in the rock vein, just because that's sort of, a good place to start. And like everybody else in COVID was, coming up with a hobby to keep them interested. And that was ours. So we were pretty prolific, to be honest, at the very beginning. And then probably for the best. Whenever you start something new, the hard part is starting and working out the kinks. I don't think any pilot episode is necessarily the best one of a show, and so it probably took us a little bit of time to find our footing. Um, the name. Do you know where the name comes from?
No, I don't. And I
You
don't think I
don't.
asked Pete.
You've never known that. Honest
I
and
don't think
unmerciful.
so.
So it's an homage to the late great rock critic Lester Bangs, who in the movie Almost Famous, the Almost Famous movie from director Cameron Crowe, he has a line in there because he's a critic. Lester Bangs was a real critic, and in the movie, the character played by Philip Seymour Hoffman tells his young protege rock critic, you got to be honest and unmerciful, and that's like
Oh,
the
okay.
only real currency. So we, just kind of trying to come up with a name of what the heck are we going to call this, music review podcast, one of many out there. Honest and unmerciful sounded like it was compelling. Like, oh yeah, shoot, we should check that out.
Yeah.
Sounds good. But also just sort of a nice quote from a movie we love. It's a great film. Have you ever seen Almost Famous?
I have, yeah, but a long time ago. I haven't seen it probably in the last decade. Probably due
Yeah,
for a rewatch. Yeah.
it holds up. It holds up. It's a fantastic film. And people that love music, particularly if you're sort of anchored in, early '70s music. So there's lots of little call outs to bands that were popular then, as well as sort of the fictitious band. But we're not talking about the movie, but it's great just for a music fan, or if
Yeah.
you are just it's a good story.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and you've covered like a lot of different artists on the show.
Yeah,
That's so for me, it was great because I think I got on board probably right around the Wildflowers app. Obviously, that was the
that
tie back
makes
to Petty because
sense.
you covered Wildflowers. And I think it
Right.
was the episode after that. So I kind of had two or three to catch up on. Then I went back and binged everything, obviously. And I've been listening ever since. And I've discovered different bands or different, bands I thought I knew and then went back and listened to, and then
Hmm.
been exposed to some stuff that I was pretty sure I wasn't a huge, like the Radiohead album. I wasn't a huge fan
Hmm.
of Radiohead. And I'm like, yeah, no, still not a huge fan of Radiohead. But I think
Yes.
the thing that you do really well on the show is that, like you said, I mean, Honest and Merciful sounds like you're putting your steel toe caps on and really sticking the boots in, which isn't what you're doing.
Right.
But when things aren't, amazing, you call it out. And I mean, most of the albums that you've reviewed haven't hit that magical 5 warm and tasty burritos,
Mm,
right? I mean, they're in that
that's
sort
right.
of 3.75 to 4.5 usually. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about having your own podcast. You get to pick what you want to talk about. So we're not subject to music that's really outside our wheelhouse. And sometimes we'll throw each other a curveball on an artist. But yeah, you're right. So just to mention, we're almost at episode 50. So maybe
yeah,
by the time this is out, we'll be at 50 episodes, 5 years. So we've ebbed and flowed on our pace, but with daily lives, that's what you do. But it's been great to have a regular chat, semi-regular chat with a good friend, and to make new friends like yourself, make new friends, or reconnect with people that we know. They were like, oh cool, you have this podcast, we haven't talked for many years. Or also just to see how this proliferates out there. Look around at your listenership around the globe and it's like, oh, that's cool, someone
yeah.
in another country is listening to us or whatever. um yeah, that's a lot of fun. And yeah, we haven't had any repeats yet. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm always, there's no shortage of artists you can cover. The question, of course, always comes up like, is this too niche? Is this an artist that one of us likes, or, is
Yeah.
it too niche? Or is it like, you know, a well-regarded classic album that no one really wants to hear about again. So I mean, it's really interesting to see like the listener stats on what connects. And we've done some pretty groundbreaking, or should I say, revered albums that people just didn't really want to hear about.
Yeah.
And then some oddball is has a lot more traction. So you never know what fan base you're going to connect with, or
Well,
maybe who you're going to get angry with you. And I'm not listening to them again.
yeah. You also find though too that I mean that's where I mean through Petty this podcast I am
Mm-hmm.
covering ground, and when you get it to a song like Free Fallin', I mean what do you say about Free Fallin' that hasn't
Right.
been said before? What do you say about Abbey Road or Sergeant Pepper, or what do you say about any of the, like you said, Back in
Yeah.
Black or whatever it might be?
Mm-hmm.
It can be not difficult, but you sort of get that thing. Oh man, I think I'm open, not repeating what anyone else has said, but I
Right.
wanted to ask you, do you find, because one thing I found was that from sort of digging into the music more, and you're a
Mhm.
musician, and I'm a musician too, but it, you have that ear anyway. And so I think that musicians do listen to music differently anyway, right? Because you hear things that lay people or people who've never
Mhm.
recorded, let's say, wouldn't notice. But do you find that that's kind of changed your appreciation for music? And as it sort of when you've gone into an album that you did know and you loved,
Right.
and you
Right.
start pulling it apart, you think, oh, man, I still love it, but I never noticed that before, and that's kind of that's a bit weak, or
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack on that question, and thanks for asking it. I think that, well, just as you said, the listener discovers something that they may not have heard before. We get to rediscover, myself and Peter, we get to rediscover albums that we may not have heard for a long time, or in the case of a classic one we love, and oh, I can't wait to talk about this album. I've heard it 50 times or 100 times or whatever. You always hear something new when you're thinking or listening critically, and you're
yeah,
trying to think, what am I going to write that's different about this? What am I going to talk about that isn't so superficial? Now, I will say that what is it, the Zappa quote? I mean, it's been variously attributed, but the claim that Frank Zappa said, that, writing about music is like dancing about architecture or something like that. It's one of these things, like, it's really, really hard to distill the joy of,
yeah,
listening to, oh, and then they changed the chord over here, and then they changed the time signature over there, and did you hear how that piano moved with the bass? And I don't
yeah,
know if that's super interesting to people that aren't musicians, but um maybe it opens up some doors, and you say, well, you know what, maybe I can't personally do that, or the listener doesn't know what that means, but it's like, yeah, this is a skill. Musicians are skilled, and the fact that you make an album and it gets out there, and it warrants, it's a good enough experience that warrants somebody like us talking about it. That's testimony to the skill behind it, and that it's um, Pete and I try to do our best, and I know you do as well, to do the research so that it is a bit more. You take something away that you maybe haven't heard before.
yeah.
That's all you can really ask for. But yeah, you're right. You definitely get more appreciation for it when you dig, and when you try to um, uncover for yourself what it is that the artist was doing or what the producer was doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that, like I said, the critical side of it, that's why you tune in the first place, but you do stay for the relationship between the host, usually if it's a co-hosted podcast. And like I said, I mean, as soon as I listen to you guys, that very first episode, like, yeah,
oh, well, thank you.
I can spend an hour or 2 hours with these guys a week easily because it's not a forced relationship. And that's why I always find I listen to so much more indie podcasting than I do mainstream, because a lot of that is sort of contrived and the relationship's contrived. It's just two people who've sort of been jammed together to present, motorsports or whatever it might be. Whereas
Sure.
if it's just two friends talking about music, well, again, like I said, it's that easy way in for us to
Right.
just
Right.
sit and eavesdrop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be honest. I mean, it's low stakes. I mean, for us, it's
Hmm.
fun. I mean, we enjoy the time put into it, and again, if someone like yourself enjoys it, and a few listeners say they like it, that's the reward. And as we talk more about music, I think that is a recurring theme, like the act of creating, the act of, that's the joy.
Yeah,
And there's no um, we have no hangups or no expectations of, we're going to reach this plateau of listenership, or no monetization or anything like that.
yeah,
It's just fun to do.
yeah.
And the fact that we've been doing it for 5 years shows that it hasn't become a burden. How many other hobbies have you dropped? Has one dropped over the years,
Yeah.
or you can't make time for? But yeah, it's for sure. That's fundamentally, it's spending a couple hours every month or so with a good friend, and talking about something we really love. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so there will be a link in the episode notes, folks, to go check out Honest and Unmerciful. So let's get into then your background as a musician. And I always like starting at the beginning because it's a good place to start. Is what was music like in the Ruskin household growing up? What were you listening to? Were your mum and dad musicians? What was the environment that you grew up in musically?
right. I think that I lived through. I was experienced a very um, unorthodox musical upbringing, in that it was kind of always on. My father, he was a musician. He played guitar. He taught me when I was a little kid to play, and he had grown up in the '60s, so lived through this all,
Yeah,
lived through the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and such. but he also had pretty diverse tastes. And so I remember being a kid, and the record player was always on
Yeah.
at the house. And again, I was in the '80s. I was born in the '80s, so showing my age here. But I was a child of the '80s. Record player was always on. He had a great collection. And as a kid, you don't know what this is. It's just, oh, there's the 12-inch cover art, and that's cool. And then you hear the record and you see it move and stuff. But I was being exposed to a lot of jazz, a lot of new age music, um, and then certainly rock classics. But I think my father probably had a sort of filter, for the kids. Don't put on too much ruckusness when they're real little. But I say unorthodox because the artists that my dad would play, and it wasn't pushing. He wasn't like pushing like, oh, hey, you need to hear this.
Yeah.
It was just kind of on. Um, or in car rides, he'd have something in the cassette tape. He really enjoyed new age artists. As a guitarist himself, he would be amazed by um, what real instrumentalists or classical guitarists could do. So folks like Pat Metheny, if you know Pat
Yeah.
Metheny's name, sort of a jazz fusion guitarist. Michael Hedges was a very famous. He was on the Windham Hill record label, so we heard a lot of Windham Hill sort of new age music. We used to always in the car listen to the show on NPR Echoes. That's been on for probably 40 years. Geez, I don't know, maybe at least. And so sort of new age and instrumental music. A jazz guitarist named Gabor Szabo, very obscure, I guess, for some. Andreas Vollenweider, a classical harpist. And these were
Wow.
all like, to me, I was like, this is cool stuff, because
Yeah.
when you're young, you don't have real sense of like what's popular or not. It's just like, this is what is, I think music is.
Yeah.
But a crystallizing moment for me in terms of moving this away from maybe the more obscure was my dad had a subscription to Columbia House. Remember that? And you used to send away your
Yeah.
penny and get 8 cassettes or whatever. Um, don't forget the shipping, or they'll send you it again. Um, he had a cassette. So this must have been 1986. A cassette of Invisible Touch by Genesis.
Okay.
And this was the album that on my young impressionable mind was like, this is my calling. This is my band. And I fell in love with that. And from then on, I was a little Genesis freak. So Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, Genesis was my thing as a kid. And maybe in the '80s, maybe around Invisible Touch time, that was everybody's thing. That was a huge album, and
Yeah.
Sledgehammer and Peter Gabriel and stuff. So, and Phil Collins was everywhere. So it wasn't odd. It wasn't like, oh, I latched onto some weird band, or like, I'm a kid that's listening to the Velvet Underground at age 6 or something. But so maybe it's not like such a weird gateway into pop and rock music. But for me, it was because I was like, oh, Genesis, give me more of that. And I started working backwards into the '70s, into their more progressive era. And by the time I got to that point, it was probably pretty countercultural to what my friends were listening to.
Yeah.
And that's good. I think that's good because there's always going to be pop music, and it's always nice to know what the current music is, I guess. And when you're a kid, you can't avoid that.
Yeah.
Whatever was popular then, that was it. Um, but I was the kid who was like, yeah, man, Genesis, we got to listen to this. And boo, no one else really wanted that. They wanted Guns N' Roses, and they wanted Nirvana, and they wanted Paul Abdul, and whatever was, big at that time.
Yeah.
So I'm always appreciative of my father. He always, just loved to go. Oh, here's another one. We always would go, when we would go out shopping or something, we'd always go to record stores and kind of dumpster dive into like the used bins or the bargain bins, or go to like the mega store where you just walls and walls of tapes and CDs,
Yeah.
and that was super fun because for me, I could go and collect what find something from one of the bands that I enjoyed. And my dad he was more brave. He'd go to the bargain bin and say like, oh, this is cool. Maybe he'd read the art, or look at the art, or read the liner notes and see, oh, there's someone I know that's peripherally related to this band. Let me check this out.
Okay.
And so a lot of oddball stuff came through the house, and they're not all winners. If they're in the
Yeah.
bargain bin, they're not all winners, but there certainly were a lot that I think that also kind of expands the musical horizon.
Yeah, so we should tell people too that we could probably do a 2 hour episode just talking about Genesis because
Hmm.
we're both huge Genesis fans, and that's why I think
Yep.
I found that sort of symbiosis again.
Yeah.
It's like I would say, dude, guys, listen to this. You got to listen to this song. Supper's ready. It's got this thing called Eggs is Eggs, sure as Eggs is Eggs, and it's gone, and everyone's
Right.
like, what is this, Kev? Like, why are you making us listen to this? Because it's cool.
Yes.
No, it's not
Yeah.
cool, Kev. Oh, isn't it? But I think that, like you said, that's that thing when
Hmm.
you're a kid you don't know. And honestly, like it's a shame that you ever learn what's cool, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just listen to what you enjoy. I mean, why does cool matter? You know?
It matters hugely, I think, when you're, especially of like middle school age or early teens. It's so important to fit in.
Yeah.
And uh, just fast forwarding a few years, the early '90s was ripe for lots of great music, and you kind of like, I don't know, you latch on to the era in which you came of age or whatever. The music of that period is like, oh yeah, that's really informative. And so, yeah, there were plenty of bands that were popular or of the scene that I was, yeah, I'm cool with that too. But I think it's important, yeah, the kids can go their own way, and that I probably did more than not. Said, you know what, I'm going to listen to Erasure and Depeche Mode and
Yeah.
um, Phil Collins and stuff, and I don't care if that's not what the kid down the hall is listening to. That's okay. I'm all right with that. It takes a certain amount of, not patting myself on the back too much, but a certain amount of bravery to stand out. And that's, again, this is not so weird. It's still still pop music, but yeah, you're right. Like it's you learn what you like, and you also have to be exposed to know what you don't like too.
Do you think? I wonder sometimes if there's an element of that is if you are a music freak, if you're just a complete
Mhm.
music nerd and it's all consuming, which it definitely is for me, and I'm sure it is for you too, where you just kind of that soundtrack. There's always something in the brain playing. There's always
Mm.
music there. You don't actually really need an iPhone or anything because there's just music there all the time. I
Sure.
think it's easier when you've got that mindset to just eschew, well, okay, yeah, that's pop and that's okay, but I don't really find it interesting. And so when you
Mhm.
find those niche little things like you're talking about Erasure, I mean, Erasure were pretty big, but maybe in North America, that's not a band that anyone's
Right.
listening to. When you find those things and you lock into it,
Mhm.
again, you know what's cool, and maybe
Yeah.
you don't bring that up with your friends or in sort of the social group,
Right.
but it
Right.
still doesn't mean that this is what I'm listening to. I don't care if Bon Jovi's the biggest band on the planet. I want to listen to, you know, The Order
Yeah.
or The Shaman or someone like that, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And aren't music fans kind of collectors too? I mean, whether it's in your brain or if it's on an on your streaming device, or in my case, I'm still kind of a physical collector. So
oh yeah,
there's a wall of CDs, and um, it's for sure I would latch onto a band and go crazy trying to collect everything.
yeah,
And that, I don't know, that I think that's particularly for folks that grew up before you could instantly find a song on your phone. That was such a joy to be like, hey, go into the record shop and find an album you'd never seen, or, oh, I've always wanted this, and then to play it for that first time, and the
yeah,
whole experience, even looking at the artwork and stuff. And this sounds all trite and cliche and old manny, but like it's it's true. It's a very different relationship with music when it's special, where it's just like, this is a physical thing I spent money on. I wanted this, and now I've got it, and I'm going to appreciate it.
yeah,
Versus, click the button. I don't like that. Skip the track. I don't like that. Skip the track. Or I don't even buy this. It's just part of my subscription fee. I still buy albums by bands I like, and they're rare because there's less case for me to do it.
yeah,
Albums are fewer and farther between. But yeah, Erasure, you bring that up. That was definitely a band I probably found in, like $3.99 cassette bin, so deep discount. And it's like, I like this and I want more of this. And then dug into the back catalog where
yeah,
no one else my age I could tell was interested in that band, or maybe just being that compulsive about collecting is what I wanted to try
yeah.
to say. Like, just that, you don't, it wasn't as important to some.
For sure. Yeah, it's funny because I only, and this is maybe you'll think, well, I am weird, but I only found out recently that when young men were in their starting to get into their interested in girls phase, that
Mhm.
quite often they would listen to music that girls listen to because then they might actually be able to have a girl touch them, perhaps, right? That
Ah,
mystical thing. Because
hmm.
to me, again, and so I'm embedded within a Van Halen podcast community and great guys, but they listen to a lot of hard rock or sort of hair metal, that type of thing,
Sure.
which I just never got into. It never once occurred to me, Brian, that you would listen to music because you might get lucky. Isn't that
Yeah.
naive and silly? Like, because as soon as everyone said it, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Why wasn't I
Hmm.
listening to Poison and Bon Jovi? Why wasn't I listening to all those bands? I could have got much further, much quicker.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, at what cost? I guess just a
Yeah.
little bit, a little selling out. A small um, moral victory for maybe some payoff. But yeah, I don't know. I think though that also you are informed by your friends and the music around you, and if it peer pressure is a thing, or
Mhm.
yeah, if you think that this is going to benefit you, sure. I will relay a story though of one time. Young Brian was my first girlfriend gave me a cassette, and it was a band, or it was an artist that she liked, and I had no interest whatsoever. And I was just like, oh, grin and bear it. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
great. It's like, is this our song? I don't think so. Trying to be polite, but like, just no, thank you. And I wasn't going to suddenly become, an obsessive fan of this band just because she liked it, and that it wasn't
Yeah.
meant to be. But it was that's I think what you're referring to.
Yeah.
You can only
Exactly. Yeah.
fake it so much. Like, yeah, if you don't like the music, you don't like it. I mean, even if you have an open mind, I think as we get older and we are music fans and absorbing lots of different styles and genres, yeah, you can see where the commonalities lie. You can hopefully appreciate, and your listeners will appreciate, um, what's being done, what's the skill of the music
Yeah.
that um, that even if it's not the best song or the artist you don't like, you can still appreciate the craft. Um, One thing that comes up, I think, a lot now is how AI and sort of the slew of studio tricks to make pop music.
Yeah.
It's like, is there even a real player on this track? I don't know. And why did it take 17 people to write and record this song? It wasn't, the four Beatles, plugging into the studio. So it's
Yeah.
things change, and maybe in 50 years we'll look back and on this age fondly, and wonder when was it that anyone ever played guitar. But I'm diverting here, but
No, but that's the conversation we have all the time, right? I mean, people who have that purist attitude to you shouldn't use effects and you shouldn't use this and there should be no da 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 da. Do you really think the Beatles wouldn't have used quantizing if they could? Do you really think they
sure,
wouldn't have used pulse reverbs? And of course, they would have used every tool they could, right?
right.
McCartney did. McCartney did go on and do the Fireman, and he did
Mm,
all kinds of things with electronic music. So that, again, that purist approach to it. I mean, I like
yeah.
four guys in a room as much as the next guy. If they're really good, that's kind of the purest element. That's the purest way you can capture music, but
Sure.
it's not the only way. And of course, it's
Yeah.
going to evolve. It's just, me and my mate Randy, my co-host on my Queen podcast, talk about this all the time. Modern pop music isn't for us. It's not made for
Right.
us. It's not supposed to be for us. So if we don't like it, it doesn't matter, right?
That's fair. That's fair. Yes. Yeah.
So when did you start playing then? How did you get into going from listening to music and you saying that
Mhm.
you had the sort of jazz and all new age background? That kind of scans as we get into talking about, the albums that I wanted to talk to you about tonight and mental health consumer. But when did you actually start playing?
Well, again, I think around the age of 6, I got my first guitar from my father, and he tried to teach me, and I took some lessons at the time, but mostly self taught with his help. And probably as many kids did, you get the keyboard. A grandparent gives you a keyboard for Christmas, the Casio sampler that you can make burp noises into and make a sample. And so I had one of those. And my dad, because he was a collector of guitars and guitar paraphernalia, and he'd make friends with the local music shop, and he'd get some weird pedals and things. Um, the crystallizing moment was plugging in my keyboard to some of his effects pedals, and
Oh, okay.
they're like, well, that's an interesting noise. And I feel a little self-conscious to be like, oh gosh, I'm this musician of any variety, because mostly self-taught, and I don't necessarily know theory, and I don't know, I'm not technically proficient in a lot of ways, but tinkering around and not being afraid to fail is goes a long way.
Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect. You got to practice. No one starts knowing what they're doing. Right? No one's a wonderful drummer the first time they pick up the sticks, or a wonderful guitarist. And so I think just enjoying the sounds that those made me not feel like this is sounds terrible. It's just like, what makes it sound good? and then you stumble upon a chord, or you stumble upon an effect, or a little, solo that sounds, oh, that's cool. I'll keep
Yeah.
working on that. And now I know where my fingers go on the keyboard, and now I know which plug to, or which, knob to turn. So that was a lot of fun, because that was like opened up the joy of music. Whereas, when you take lessons, even guitar, like, your fingers hurt and it's tough to make the shapes, and it's
Yeah.
feels like homework. And if you're not inspired to do it, you're not going to do it. So I think the inspiration there was like, I'm making sounds that they kind of sound like things on the record.
Right.
Maybe that was it. Um, and if I can make the bridge for us here, so I spent my childhood playing around making these noises in my bedroom with the headphones on, but then when I came across music like early '90s techno and electro pop, so I already mentioned Erasure, but Depeche Mode and Moby, when I heard these electronic acts or synth rock acts, I was like, that sounds like stuff I do on my keyboard. And
Yeah.
that was the gel that it's like, oh wow, this is a genre of music that people actually bother with. It wasn't just, sounds in the bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was for them originally too, but it became its own, popular genre. And so I tried to emulate that, or it was, accidental. I'm
Yeah.
accidentally making it, or maybe it's just the fact that Casio keyboard had the beat that sounded like something on the Depeche Mode record, and when you plugged
Yeah.
it into this effects pedal, it made a cool noise, like just like Depeche Mode. So that was fun, and that was maybe a step towards wanting to make music of my own and not just doodling around.
It's interesting because I think as a kid, and I was a keyboard player and I had piano lessons when I was young, walked away from it, came back to it right around the time that a friend of mine introduced me to OMD. So it's
Oh,
the
really?
same thing when you listen to Architecture and Morality and you start messing around the keyboard and it's got all these different pads and banks, and when you can sort of combine things and start mucking or anything, hang on a minute,
Mm.
that kind of sounds a bit like that. And then you learn that that's exactly what they were doing. They were just changing envelope settings and changing attack
Mm-hmm.
formations, all those kinds of things that we're talking about is what kids do when they're
Yeah.
unfettered by training. And I think that that's sometimes why when you're self-taught, you do have that ability, or at least that willingness to, as you said, to fail and to
Right.
accept that failing is learning and that some good will come out of it. And sometimes you don't fail, and sometimes you get this amazing thing out of it
Right.
that is yours and you've come up with.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's a ton of fun, and it's very rewarding. And that was, uh, I think, not only the joy of making the music, but also being able to capture it
Yeah.
and, put it on a tape or listen back and say, oh, that's good. Or just trying to make, we should make a song, or make a song with your friends, or we should try to do this. Um, and it never turns out like you want it to. Your 12-year-old brain thinks this is going to be amazing, and then you listen, it's like, oh, this is terrible. It sounds, it's recorded on a crappy mic on a crappy keyboard, and it never is as good as it could be. However, again, another sort of like counter pop cultural moment for me was, um, not only did I do this in the privacy of my bedroom, but also like I took it on the road, which was to like the high school talent shows.
Okay.
And what I look back on this and I can't imagine, because I'm a pretty shy guy and pretty introverted, like performing on a stage and having to be perfect, doing your little mini concert of the song that you wanted to play for them in a talent show is tough enough,
Yeah.
but also facing the cruel audience of teenagers and our high schoolers that are like, boo, they don't want to hear whatever you're tinkering with. But I did it anyway, and I remember playing, or forcing the audience to listen to something weird on a keyboard, and then playing a guitar and through with a delay on it. And
Right.
someone came up to me and was like, wow, that sounded like Pink Floyd. And I was like, okay, I wasn't aiming for that, but if that's what you got out of it, great. And um, yeah, I not only did that, I did that, subjected my peers to that a few times. So I didn't get the hint, I guess,
Yeah.
that this wasn't maybe for everyone, but it made me happy. And I felt like that was, the sharing of the talent, as you do in a talent show. We did it anyway. And that fed an itch too, to being like, okay, I can perform this, or maybe somebody will like this beyond just me.
I think that that's that part too. And I'm, I come off as being quite outgoing and sort of, and confident. But I'm really kind more introverted than extroverted in a lot of ways. I just hide it very, very, very well. But that intrinsic satisfaction that you get from doing the thing rather than necessarily the feedback
Mhm.
is so much more, I think it's so much more sustainable because, if you get to the end of writing a song or an album or whatever it might be, and you can
Mhm.
look back at it and say, that is the best I could, that's the best thing, that's the best way that I could deliver and perform that piece of music that I came up with.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than that. There's just no feeling that when someone says, "Oh, I really like it," that's great. That's a great
Mhm.
feeling. But to me, the process of the spark of the imagination, the discipline to act on it and to execute and then to complete it and get something out the other end. I think
Right.
if that's the goal and if that's the reward, then you're sort of set for life, aren't you? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, that's art too, isn't it, Kevin? Like, so,
Mhm.
I was an art major in college, and so it is exactly that. Like, you just have to create. It
Yeah,
has to come out of you. It's important. It's important for your mental health. It's important for your emotions. It's important for your skill in developing a talent. It's important to get the critiques and feedback, and it's just something you like to do. Like, some people will like to go fishing, or some people will like to go hiking, or whatever it is that you just clears your headspace. For me, it's that creating.
yeah,
And so I will, and I have for sure prioritized sleep, or prioritize creating music instead of sleep. So I
yeah,
was like, I just need to make this, or you know um, and that also will, again, with respect to committing the music to a record, whatever that recording media may be. um, Peter and I have talked about this a lot in the podcast. It's like, an album is a snapshot of where the artist was at
of
that
course.
time. And it's a little collection of snippets. These are the songs that we want to represent here and now with our sound, whatever our phase, our era. This is, in bands that have phases and eras, you can look back, you're like, wow, that's cool. This album sounds very different than that one, or whatever. I think the same way in terms of making my own music. This is a little snapshot of where my head was and where my talent level was for this 3 months or 6 months or however long it took to make the record. And then when you look back, you can be like, oh geez, this was a mess and I've improved. That's always satisfying to
Yeah.
say that you've something you made when you were a kid. Yeah, oh, hopefully you got better. Also, there's also that joy of like, wow, that really was great. And maybe I peaked too early and I can't do that again. But it's like, wow, I used to know what I was doing. And that's also kind of something uh, to remind oneself when you're in some sort of writer's block, or you just think, oh, this is kind of a slog right now. It's like, well,
Yeah.
it isn't all a slog. It can be rewarding, but the reward is yeah, mostly I think in the act of creating, and then the second part is the sharing
Yeah.
and seeing how other people respond to it. Because if you're excited about it, you spend the time to make your music or make your podcast. Yeah, of course you want someone else to have that same thrill, and and hopefully share that with you. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. It was great.
So let's get into then mental health consumer. And I wanted to just kind of backtrack really quickly because my entry into your work was through an episode of Honest and Unmerciful
Oh
that you
goodness.
guys did on Boards of Canada.
Yeah.
This weird Scottish duo that make, like I said, music that I was not aware that anyone was doing this. I had no point of reference for it. So
Hmm.
to me, that was like at 52 years old, you don't expect to have a completely new door in the music house opened and see there's a whole bunch of new toys in there that you didn't know you were allowed to play with. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So that episode sort of unlocked that sense of, okay, music doesn't necessarily have to, and of course, I mean, I listen to classical music and you mentioned jazz. So there are
Mhm.
different forms from verse, chorus.
Right.
But this idea that you can really just build soundscapes and that's okay, and that it can be
Mhm.
interesting and it can be engaging was completely new to me. So then I went back and I picked up well, it was the first one I listened to was Far Above the World Tonight because you'd posted on your social media that it had been remastered and it was put out.
Mm.
So I
Mhm.
wanted to just talk first of all about mental health consumer as a project, when
Sure.
that began and what was kind of the idea behind using that name and head
Yeah.
into the direction that you did with it.
Yeah. I'll try to be brief on this. And is when I got to grad school, so I was making music all this time, and I was using 4-track recorders and keyboards and guitars and stuff. by the time I got to grad school, I got into digital audio workstations, so
Yeah.
DAWs, right? And that is just like, okay, now you can everything can be on the beat, and I don't have to re-record and mess up my flub takes. I can just fix it in the computer, and I spent an awful lot of time making in my bedroom when I should have been sleeping or should have been studying or doing something else, working on research. I would be up late because I was kind of a night owl also, and a little insomnia and stuff. I would be making music. Um, the mental health consumer name was something I thought of to be more freeing, actually, because you can get down the rabbit hole of creating where, oh, it's got to be perfect, or I just need to spend more time on this, and you can overthink music. And so I wanted to do something that was a little bit more raw and a little bit more immediate and a little more jammy, which is kind of at odds with a lot of electronic music where it's
Right.
very programmed and mechanical and down to the beat. There isn't a lot of swing, there isn't a lot of human elements to it, or at least oftentimes you don't pick that up. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like you hear people strumming. You don't hear the imperfections because they're not they're not there. So and it also kind of works well because I'm not the best musician. So leaving the rough edges in is by rule, not by exception. um, so yeah, and mental health consumer. So I started putting out albums under that name, and by putting them out, I mean, well, first it was like sharing with friends, and you make the CD and give it to somebody, and it's like, okay, that's nice, but um, then putting it up on the internet, and of this time was mid 2000s. Um, Net labels were a big thing, and they're not so much anymore. But
Yeah.
now we have Bandcamp and we have SoundCloud, and everyone can put their music out on Spotify if they want. But it was still a bit novel back then, which is going on 20 years ago, to release your music onto the internet
Yeah.
and also on a label of sorts, even though these were, generally free Creative Commons sharing of music. So I just got in touch with some, net labels, and I sort of that opened up another window. I think just as you may have heard Boards of Canada, and it's like, what's this? I think my forays into net label music opened my eyes more to ambient, because
Right.
I was definitely making bang bang crash crash techno music.
Right.
Because I had these sample packs, and I had these, I've been able to program beats, and my music was pretty hard and not very subtle at all. Um, but net labels, and again, probably, there's probably some element of my new age upbringing with, hearing, pretty ambient music. And I'm sure, Brian Eno or folks like that crossed my ears at some point without me knowing about it. But, ambient is such a large genre, such a broad genre, I should say. So what is ambient? What is a soundscape? And how does this fit into the overall realm of electronic music or instrumental music? That's an hour and a half discussion there too.
Yeah.
So we don't have to do that. But so it's funny because over time, working with net labels, number one, it forces me to be a little bit more polished, because if you were going to put it out there, you want it to be your best effort, and also to be a bit more thoughtful about composition
Yeah.
and making, whether it's an album that's cohesive or a track that sounds like it's everything's in its right place and it's not just a groove for 5 minutes. So yeah, you just try to sort of evolve your style, and I guess I did.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But
that go ahead, please.
yeah, no, no. I was just gonna comment on there, was always something that you said. But when you get into the door, when you get into a digital audio workstation,
Mhm.
that just it's sort of, again, it's like opening a treasure chest, right? Because as a creative person, you've got
Yeah.
so much capacity to play and to sandbox and to do things.
Yes.
A DAW kind of is like an instrument in some ways. You have to learn how to use it. You've got to perfect your skill. You have to learn its limitations. You have to sort of figure out
Mhm.
how does it work for me? All those kinds of things. So I always kind of bristle a little bit when there's that sense, again, like I said, it goes back to the whole, well, it's cheating or whatever else. Well, no, it's a tool, and
Yeah.
it's really, really helpful to be able to get into something like Far Above the World Tonight, which you couldn't get four, five, six, seven guys in a room and play that,
Mm.
because of the nature of what it is. you have to do that through that meticulous process of layering things up and trying to find, okay, well, what does this need to sound like? What
Right.
part of the frequency is it going to sit in? How does it all fit? So
Mhm.
let's talk about this because this was the first thing that I listened to of yours, Far Above the World Tonight. And like I said, I think I'd messaged you. I listened to it on one of my walks.
Mhm.
October 5th, I looked it up. It was October 5th. I bought it on the 4th, listened to it on the 5th. And I was walking down toward the river and it
Mhm.
was sunset and I had that album playing. And I think that that was a real stroke of luck again, like just a little bit of serendipity that there was no sensory distraction for me.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It was kind of dark, so I wasn't bombarded with light. There was no one else around. I was far enough away from the traffic, so I could also, I was just immersed in this completely different alien world that you created. So tell me, how did you what was the construction of that? Was it sort of,
Mm.
I've got all these ideas, I'll throw them together and I'll see if I can make them work as a piece? Or did you have that a narrative idea of I want to say, or I want to sit in this space roughly, and so I need to make enough sounds and soundscapes around that to make it
Mhm.
coherent? What was the in into that piece of music?
The end was definitely a theme, and I wanted this to be um, kind of a concept album, which it isn't a very common thing for electronic music.
Right.
Now, again, growing up in the '90s and being really immersed in '90s and 2000s electronic music, there were albums bands that had more of a epic quality than just things you would hear in a club. But what's a concept album for electronic music where maybe don't have any vocals?
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to make a concept, and I think probably Boards of Canada is probably the best analogy to use, or best example, I should say, to use, of a band that forms really tight um, thematic records and songs that are like transportive. Like you just listen to this, and it's like you are the classic example, or for Boards of Canada, is like you're nostalgic for a time that may not even have existed, or you may not even have been there, but you feel it,
Yeah.
or it brings back some childhood memory. So for the Far Above the World Tonight, it was one of my early attempts at something a little bit more instrumental, a lot more guitar, less beats. And in fact, there's not a whole lot of beats on that album. Um, I did recruit Pete to help with some guitar parts, so
Yeah.
that was fun too. And he recorded some things, and I just kind of used samples. I don't know if he knew what he was getting into on that one. And another thing that sort of sparked that was the Numbers Stations recordings that I found on like Internet Archive. Are you familiar with Numbers Stations?
No.
Okay,
No.
so it's sort of like a Cold War relic of these radio stations, these like frequencies where spies would like repeat numbers, and they would be encoded that they go out over the radio waves, and if you didn't have the code, you wouldn't know what this was. So you just hear
Okay.
some voice saying numbers, and they might be in a different language, or they might be interspersed with other sounds. So someone created this whole collection of these, and it's called the Conant Project, and it's been variously sampled. I'm sure that Boards of Canada has used it. Lots of Aphex Twin type artists, a little bit more out there, have sampled or used Conant Project recordings of number stations. So I found a few of those that I wanted to use, and it just sounded so unearthly and
Yeah.
so disembodied that I had this little theme. I was like, okay, I'm going to write an album about a satellite, and what's happening to the satellite. Is it sort of floats above the earth, and maybe it's going to kind of crash into the earth, or maybe you're on the earth listening for signals. So that's kind of what the album is about. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
and when you immediately started like, oh, this big theme about a satellite, well, it's going to sound a little celestial. It's going to be a little bit more, maybe you can creep in some sound effects or spacey type effects, and it kind of snowballed from there.
So I want to, okay, if you'll indulge me, I want
Please.
to pitch to you. So I've got my theory on sort of music in general is once the artist has created a piece of art, whether it's music or a painting, whatever it is, as soon as they release it,
Mhm.
it's not theirs anymore, right? There's sort of, it is yours, your intellectual property, all that kind of that sense. But it's when you release this album and I listen to it, now it's mine. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so
Sure.
the way I interpret it is just, and again, if you're not using it for malicious purposes or you're not trying to impress people, whatever it is, I think any
Yeah.
interpretation of an artwork is valid. So I wanted to just
Yeah.
kind of give you the narrative that I get from it because I've listened to that album, God, like 4 or 5 times now, and I always listen to it at night. I just
Okay.
I've got this thing now where I don't think I'd ever want to listen to it during the day because I don't think it would work. So
Interesting. Okay.
to me, so there's 8 tracks, and so this,
Mhm.
like I said, and maybe we'll cut this. I don't know. We'll see. But the satellites, it feels like the satellite. The first track is the satellite trying to get someone's attention. It's broadcast, got all this information, and it's just trying to get in touch with someone or something. And then we get like the second track is called Forest Receiver Station, and to me, that's like a little spot back on Earth that's sort of all overgrown and there's weeds and everything, but there's still some electronic equipment sitting there listening. And
Mhm.
so there, and we get, we get that brilliant incongruity between the mechanical sounds that you use in the sort of the synths and those kind of, little bits of static and those kinds of things. But then you
Mhm.
get birdsong in there,
Yeah.
right? So we get that sort of the modernity and the legacy.
Yeah.
Then we get almost like the cutaway scene where there's some like an animal wandering into a sort of a derelict building, the Sunlight Shed, where
Yeah.
I think that makes me think then, okay, well maybe this is sort of post-apocalyptic where there aren't any humans left, so it's just a machine listening, and
Mm.
then one of these machines picks up this signal. So then the satellite tries to reconfigure it and it realizes that, oh, there's an endpoint there I can get all this information and dump it down to. You get
Mhm.
these dark periods where it's trying to process the message and reconfigure it all. And then, once it's got this link, and I think that's downward through the spheres, it's got this link and now it's dumping all the information back down. And
Mm.
then we go down back to down to terra firma, back down to the planet, and the whatever this machine is, it's taking it all, it's assembling it all. Okay, good. I'm going to categorize this. I'll catalog it, and I'll put it where it needs to be. And
Sure.
then it's doing things. I did my job, and then the satellite thinks, excellent. I'll go look for more information,
Mm.
and then it goes on its way again. So what I took away from it all is that it's sort of a commentary on utilitarianism in a sense
Mm.
that the satellite's got a job to do and it doesn't know that it's disconnected from where it came from and what it was doing, and it goes away and
Yeah.
does its job in it, and it comes back and then it dumps all this information. And really, at a base level, humans were sort of doing the same kind of thing. We're getting information and we're trying to give it to someone else and we're trying to communicate.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so I got this really cosmic experience just from sitting down and
Sure.
spending some time thinking about this instrumental piece, So
Oh,
thank you.
that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I'm really glad that you spent the time with it and took a chance on something that may not have been in your immediate wheelhouse, and also that you got so much out of it. I really liked what you said, Kevin, about like once you put it out there, it's not yours anymore. Um, any art is going to it's subjective, right? It's all subjective.
Yeah.
So it's means one thing for another and means nothing for somebody else. And I mentioned art school. Like we used to have these critiques where you show your work, your sculpture, your painting, and people would just criticize it, critique.
Yeah.
You're trying to do this in a constructive way, but sometimes it's just really hard to get into somebody else's work and you say, oh, I like it because it's blue and it makes me hungry, or something. So, but what I found was, and this has been true of my whole life, I found that the things that I really was very proud of and really wanted to share, and I'm excited about this work. A lot of times it would just be like, no response, shrugged off. Yeah, that's nice, fine.
Yeah.
And then it's the little thing that someone else really enjoys. Like I didn't spend a lot of time, or I didn't put nearly that much effort into it, and it's like, oh, that's amazing, I love it, and it's
Yeah.
you just don't know how people are going to respond. So when someone like yourself or a listener does respond positively or does come up with a meaning that's specific to them, and that's it, it's yours now. It's your album. You can
Yeah.
listen to it at night, and it's your nighttime album about that. Awesome. Maybe that was different than my intent, and I
Yeah.
don't mean to. I'll be honest, like did not plan that this was going to have a cosmic universal
Right.
theme. But I can see where went there. It's not too far off. And isn't that cool too? Because in the end, it's just a humble record with some, fairly dodgy guitar and, some sounds that are sometimes pretty and sometimes they're actually very cacophonous. There's
Yeah.
a whole segment where it's like, I think it might be downward through the spheres, where it's sort of like, or cries from decaying orbits, where it's supposed to be the satellite kind of losing control and maybe burning up a little bit in the atmosphere, where it may not be pretty music for people. And back to the soundscape thing, like, or ambient, like sometimes it's just background noise to folks, and sometimes people will just love it. Can you
Yeah.
listen to an hour of a drone? Like for me, I need a little more variety than just a droning sound. But for other people, they might start to meditate, and it might be the best thing they heard all week.
Yeah.
So again, it's subjective. But yeah, you're not far off, and I'm grateful that uh, that my little theme, my little concept, seem to have held up. Even though there are no words, and other than the
Yeah.
track titles to give some guidance, there's not really a story or anything that's. But what I do like to do, and here's a trick. I think this is a trick the Beatles employed for their medleys. Right? Sometimes the songs aren't going anywhere, or you're just not sure how to wrap it up. Well, seek them together.
Yeah.
Make it a continuous mix, and it sometimes just sounds great. And reprise something, and it's like, wow, that sounds a lot more intentional.
Well, and that's what I was going to comment on is pretty much exactly that. The first, I don't know, the first 3, 4, 5 minutes when I was listening to it the first time, my first thing in my head was like, is this music? Like, is this even music? I don't, you know what I mean? Like, because
Oh gosh,
I just, well,
maybe.
no, but, and I don't mean that as it sounds like criticism, but just because I didn't have that grounding, I'd never heard anything like this, right? But
Mm,
then once you start listening to it, like, oh, wait a minute, no, there are phrases and there are themes that are recurring and there are things that we come back to and there are certain specific tones and there are certain specific moods that do go through and it's like okay I think I know roughly where I've got something to hold on to now, you know what I mean,
yeah.
and then the more you listen to it, because it's not verse chorus and it's over in
Right.
3 minutes,
Hmm.
you've got to pay attention. And I think it's that thing of when you've got more complex works like this, they really reward that repeat listening because once you've calibrated for it and once you sort of know it, then you can listen around the edges of it, right?
Hmm.
And now I can hear, oh, right down on the right channel, right at the bottom of the mix, there's just a little, almost like a vehicle reversing tone or something like that, right? You'll
Sure.
notice these things as you go back and listen again. So I think that
Yeah.
it's far richer when you've got, that sort of complexity to it.
Well, that's nice to hear. I think as track count increases, if I was used to making 4 tracks, and then DAW, you have basically unlimited tracks.
Yeah.
You can bury things in the mix. Um, but the danger there, of course, is is it too muddy? Is it too much going on? Can you overload a track? You got to be careful with the levels. And further, like electronic music, it's about the groove a lot of the time. And so there's a danger I find, and I'm definitely guilty of this, of, going to that well one time too often, where you're like, okay, you got to switch it up because it isn't a verse, chorus, verse.
Yeah.
So how long do you ride that groove, or how many times do you repeat that phrase or that measure before it's just like, okay, come on, moving on. It's got to do something. It's got to evolve. No one likes to hear the same thing over and over and over and over. But
Yeah.
it's I find that ambient work or more experimental or soundscape type stuff allows for more of that freeform sound experiments because you're not tied to the grid as much.
Yeah.
Maybe not even at all. Maybe you're tied to a tempo or you're tied to a chord structure that you can play off of. But I'll be honest, I used to think, oh, ambient is easy to do because you can just take the beats away and you can just make some pretty pads on your keyboard and, that's nice. But no, it's actually a lot harder than it
Yeah.
looks, or harder to keep it interesting and keep it, make it to the point where, it's unique because anybody could press the chord and just hold it and
Yeah.
just like, okay, that's fine. Um, you know, uh, we've
Yeah,
mentioned this on.
Yanni, for example. Yanni's keyboard solo is a one note for 8 hours. So
It sounds pretty, but it's not. Well, it's him, I guess. Um, we've said this on the podcast plenty of times that Brian Eno's definition of ambient music, that it's equally ignorable as it is interesting. And are you familiar with his sort of discovery, I guess, quote unquote, discovery of ambient music?
no,
Brian Eno was late, he was in Roxy Music, right? And
yeah,
it was and pretty experimental rocker, glammy and doing all kinds of cool studio tricks. And you'll remember him on Genesis. He came in and did some sound effects on the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway concept
yeah,
album and stuff. So yeah, all over the '70s, seen as sort of this weirdo experimenter. And so I guess he was laid up in the hospital, or he was recovering from an illness, and he was listening to, or a record was on in his room, kind of low, quiet, and it sort of became a meditative thing for him, where this music was on in the background that you could easily ignore, but also it became, very attention getting if you turned your ears to that. I mean, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but like imagine you're in a quiet room, but if you pay attention, you'll start to hear, oh, there's the refrigerator humming or
Yeah.
the furnace turned on or whatever, the sounds or the house is creaking or whatever it is. Like there's hardly ever a place where you have total silence. And not that this is necessarily music, but this is sound and appreciative sound. So anyway, as sort of was making his early ambient works, I think that was his credo, that it should be enough that's interesting enough that people would want to listen to my sound. It isn't boring, but if it's not as demanding as maybe a cut from Roxy Music would be.
Right.
Okay, you're going to hear this. It's not something you can really ignore, or it's not totally amorphous. And so for me, I think learning that ambient music isn't amorphous background to being something that's actually, this is really an immersive, and you should pay attention to it. That's kind of my mode. I don't want to aim for ignorable. I want to aim for interesting.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I was going to ask you because you mentioned there something that I've actually got in my notes underlined. Do you work to any rules like never more than 8 bars in one place? Because that was the comment I was going to make, is that because, with some of these tracks, and we'll get into the Echoes I Sent, there is a lot of repetitiveness in the groove, like you're saying, that you get into that sort of, if it's a shape or it's a lick or a riff, whatever you want to call it, and it can go on for 2 minutes, but there's so much going on around the periphery of that you'll change the beat, you'll change just the effects on the beat, you'll just change the snare sound, you'll bring in one pad for 8 measures, or you'll bring it in for 6, or you know what I mean. So that sense of, like you said, it being easy is, I mean, like you said, look, Lamb Lies Down is one of the most complex pieces of music I've ever listened to, and I have to be in the mood for that album. I love it, but it's not something I'm going to stick on, Trespasser, I'm going to stick on Foxtrot, or before I stick on Lamb.
Yeah.
When we get into Echoes I Sent, I think that's more accessible for someone who's going to come to Brian Ruskin's music. I'm glad that I started out where I did. And so this is kind of, I think it's kind of funny now when I think back, because when you posted that and I kind of picked up on it, it was because you were talking about the Echoes I Sent, this new album that we're going to be talking about here. And I said, well, I'm not going to listen to anything else then. I'm going to listen to the one I've got, because I know that was 2010. I think it was 2010, right? And so in my headspace, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to listen to the stuff in between. I don't want to see that journey from this one to Echoes I Sent. I want to see how much different it is. And it's wildly different. Like, it's the same. You can tell it's you, but it's very, very different. So Echoes I Sent, this is the new album that's coming out, well, it'll be out
December
by the time
5th.
this goes out.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to get this out on Saturday. I'm hoping to get this
Well, yes,
really
it'll be officially out December 5th.
Yeah.
And so I am partnering with a label, a Bandcamp label, but they also have, physical products called EC Underground. And so they were kind enough to work with me to release this album, and they've been really fantastic and supportive for sort of the marketing and the promotional campaign. Now, I should say most of my music is pretty DIY, and I can self-release it, and anyone can self-release. You can put your own thing on Bandcamp, and you could try to sell it, or you could try to promote it. It's tough. It's tough work, the marketing side, and then, for your podcast, like, you have to make something grow, you've got to put the time into it to grow your network.
Yeah.
And there's so much music now that it's harder than ever, I think, to compete for people's ears and their downloads or their sales. And so for me, I'm fine with that. Again, it's the whole process of creating, sharing. I'm not in it to make any money. It would be nice if more people enjoyed it. So there's only so far I can go on my own. I have my own net label called Believe in Billy Records. And I have over the years released so much stuff, and I don't know how much of it holds up, but just to put it out there. And so I'm trying something a little bit different. Over the years, partnering with other labels, indie labels, net labels, some are still around, some have folded, but this new one, EC Underground, I'm very excited to work with them, because they've been really, this has been the most serious campaign, I think, just trying to get it out there to, different platforms and do interviews, and appreciate your time here to interview me as well. Like, it feels more serious, and it feels like, a bit more of a monumental release amongst the hundreds probably that I've subjected to my friends and family that, they're, oh yeah, okay, another Brian put on another album. That's fine. I don't really need to check that out. But, if you were to see the journey, like it's all different parallel paths. I've had different production names. I've had different people I partner with. They all sound like me, but different. And, and so I don't know that, um, as I said at the beginning, like mental health consumer was an alias I used to try to be freer, but over time it just turned into the same thing that I was always doing anyway. You
Right.
just sort of just converge to your style or to the limits of your talent. So they're not all winners, but yeah, I think in terms of accessibility, the Far Above the World Tonight album isn't really the most easy listening. But by the same token, there are plenty of albums that are a lot more straightforward in your face that I've made that are just like, this is all banger, they all dance, hard techno or, kind of a similar vein. And then, the question of how many bars do you repeat before you give it a break? That's even harder to do because, what works in the club doesn't necessarily work in the, listening in your headphones.
Well,
So,
let's dive into it then because
hmm.
straight away, the first track, The Echoes I Sent, the first four bars of it, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what this is because I used to listen to Jean-Michel Jarre. Like I
Oh,
get
okay.
that sort of so
Yeah,
I can understand because this has got, like you said, this is more beat driven. Well, until we'll talk about the last three
yeah.
songs maybe as
Mhm.
being possibly like a little mini suite. That is the way I sort of listen to that on the
Sure.
album now. But
Mhm.
we don't get the drums in that first song till halfway through. There's sort of an atonality to the synth wash underneath it. So there's, like I said, for a music nerd, there's a ton of stuff to listen to in that first sort of 2 minutes of that song. But also, it's easy to listen to straight at the get when you put it on. It's like,
Yep.
okay, I know basically what this is, right? So I wanted
Yep.
to ask about when you're putting this set of songs together, whether again there was sort of a okay, this is like 5 6 songs I've already got done or 5 6 ideas I've already got done. I think that I can cohere these into a whole. Or was it sort of again, okay, I've got an idea here that I want to sort of narratively step through and explore in different ways. Like what was the creative process for this album?
Sure.
Because I imagine it
Right.
would have been different from the, from
Yeah.
first one.
Yeah. Right. I think I always wanted it to be cohesive. I think that, again, the album is the collection and it's just sort of fold together. I don't try to do too much or too many, I'm not mixing too many genres or, it's sort of, if you're gonna, the way you build up the album with the songs, hopefully makes sense. Um, and so it's not just like, oh, here's 12 scraps lying around.
Yeah.
As as a record reviewer, okay, sometimes there's a dud on the album. And you're like, well, they must have had, they had some space to fill, or they just couldn't figure out anything, or they were trying, but it wasn't quite as successful.
Yeah.
So, um, I feel for a musician trying to, sort of pad the album. I don't generally have that problem. I generally build up until it feels right and then kind of cull it down from there. So the
Okay.
concept, I guess, in this case isn't so heady as the other record with the satellite and decaying orbits and stuff. This is more like, okay, these are standalone tracks that are of a mood and are probably reflecting, just sort of my creative mood and thought process at that time that held together well. And yeah, it's not so blunt that, like, oh gosh, you're bombarded with 10,000 sounds at the beginning. It's a bit of a little bit of a build for some tracks, but some are much heavier. And
Yeah.
as you said, at the end, there's some that are kind of light. And I like that too, that sort of an album should ebb and flow. So, I mean, I'm not trying to make this into like the monumental work of art, but it is more that the idea here that in the name that reflects that, the echoes I sent, is that, you make a song and you work on it and you iterate on it. And sometimes it's changes significantly over that time. The other thing, a piece of this is I've been working with a producer in England. His name's Dave Hall. He goes by Echo Fisk. This is his production name, but EKO, not Echo like ECHO, but Echo Fisk, like the oil field in the
Right.
North Sea. He So we've learned a lot. I think collaborating is fantastic to just stretch your talents and to do something that you wouldn't normally do. But I've never met the guy. We
Right.
bounce emails, and I have worked with a guy in the Czech Republic named Jiří Blazek. We've worked for a dozen years. never met. We just, found each other's music, found each other on a fan forum, just like, you stumbled upon us because we interviewed or we reviewed, Tom Petty's Wildflowers,
Yeah.
and here we are. Same thing, we were fans of a band and we started making music together. But it's great because where I'm going with it with the echoes I sent is that, sometimes you send an idea to somebody else and then they reshape it and it comes back to you, and it's sort of the bounce of, or like the telephone game with a
Right.
song that where it starts and where it stops are two different things entirely. So, and then further, like, just to be a little, self-referential, it's like, well, you put this music out there, putting it out into the world. Is anyone going to listen to this? Will the echoes I send reverberate on anyone else's eardrums? We'll see.
But you talked about like there are heavy moments on this album, and I would say track two. I mean, that bass pad right at the top is like, whoa, what is that? And so I wanted to ask you about
Yeah,
when you're crafting, when you obviously, as a little keyboard nerd, you know,
sure.
getting something with like 6,000 sounds, and I'm like, oh, this is heaven. Like I can just spend
Yes,
hours
yes.
and hours and hours now.
Right.
But then you've also got that, like you said, in the door and with that post processing, I get the sense
Mhm.
that you're not using a lot of tones that are out of the box because
Right.
it feels like you're doing a lot of work after. Say, okay, well, I like that, but it's not exactly right. So I'm going to get into the envelope, start messing things
Yes.
around, and see what happens when I turn the dial all the way up. Would that be
Mhm.
a fair sort of observation?
It is fair, and this again reflects sort of the journey of making music on with a DAW. The very first one I got, a friend of mine, I gave her one of my CDs that I was still using a 4 track and using the drum presets on the Casio,
Yeah.
and she told me, "Man, you gotta use this because you need better beats because that sounds terrible. The bossa nova beat on the Casio or whatever is just really limited. It's limiting." And yeah, I'm not a good keyboard player at all. I'm sure uh, could play circles around me, but I used to remember going into a music store and oh, there's the beautiful chord, and you play a chord and it sounds so much better just because
Yeah.
it has that cool new preset. So yeah, you use the tools you've got, and the new shiny is always fun to play around with. So basically, what I'm getting at is that when I had my first DAW, I was like, yeah, it comes with a sample CD of 8,000 beats and 46 million little different instruments, and I loaded up on it. It was all preset.
Yeah.
You're just moving them around and picking your favorites, and that's fine. But and it's your own music because no one else has ever made it that way.
Of
Like
course.
I always kind of felt like, okay, well, it's okay to use samples. It's okay to use loops because I'm choosing how they go together
Yeah.
and making the song. But it also feels, in the end, you feel like this sounds mechanical. This sounds um, cheating a little, or that. Well, what if I try to program my own beat, or what if I try to tweak that sound?
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. Like the sounds that I do now, yeah, I mean, they're ultimately born from either a keyboard or a sound that I have, in a DAW somewhere, a generator. But I always messing around with them. And that
Yeah.
that interesting, that second track, it's called Sometime Later. Um, oh goodness, the beginning of that, the original version, I was playing it in the car just on my commute to demo it. And it was like destroying my speakers. So overblown. It's still pretty overblown, but it was like, oh goodness, I need to go back and EQ that. Um, and that's something else you learn too, right? Like what sounds good in your headphones isn't necessarily what sounds good in a car or sounds good
Of
a
course.
actual stereo. Um, and so yeah, that's again more of the echoes of trying to fix mistakes or make it better. I'm not good at mastering music, um, and so I think working with collaborators that have a tune attention to that, or at least can be an
Yeah.
editor, is helpful. Um, and then similarly, when you're releasing something, okay, well, I got to make this the best. I got to mix this down so that it's not clipping too much or it's not overloaded. There's some headspace. Um, Actually, let me ask you a question, Kev. You've probably heard a fair share of remastered albums over the years.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just, oh, what do they do? They brickwall this. It's just, it hurts your ears.
It's that frustrating thing. I mean, I think we're through the loudness wars
Mm-hmm.
more or less. There's definitely an artifact of that in especially modern rock music, where it's just fill every frequency absolutely to the max. And when you look at the waveform, it's just a solid green bar.
Yeah.
And I hate that. And I think that going back and listening to those remasters, when you then go, especially on vinyl or if you're on CD, when you
Mhm.
go listen to them, you think, well, they haven't really improved it. And then actually, there's a loss of fidelity. I
Mhm.
think I'll just stick with the original. And it's kind of the same, actually, I find with, I'm a huge Kinks fan. Don't buy a stereo mix of a Kinks album. Get the mono. It's supposed to be a mono. Like the stereo's just
Yeah.
going to mess everything up. They didn't mean it to be that way. So it
I
is
see.
kind of sometimes unnecessary, but I think it's just a product of because people expect it to sound like this in this decade. You got to go
Mhm.
back and make it sound like that, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair critique, but yeah, I often I don't like the albums that hurt your ears that just feel
No,
like you're bombarded with the well of sound, and yeah, I try to avoid that, not always successfully. Um,
I think there's lots of space. I mean, we're going to talk about that. There is lots of space, even though there is so much going on. Like I said, this is why it again, the two albums that I've listened to and the two albums that I have, they really, really, really reward those repeat listens because like I said, once you've got the general shape, then you can go back and you can listen to. It's like watching a movie, right?
sure.
I've seen Three Amigos 8 million times. On the seventh million time, I realized that a background actor was doing something that you hadn't noticed before,
Right.
right? Just because you know what, I don't need to watch that anymore. I know what's going on there. I'll watch that instead. And I like
Mhm.
that this album again gives me other things to look at. So 12 string thing, track three, is that actual guitar?
It is, yeah, and so this
Okay,
is
I
maybe
kind
the
of wonder because
most
the effect on it is so cool.
yeah this is maybe the tenuous connection to Tom Petty. You know, there's a 12 string guitar is actually being used, and yeah, I just call it 12 string thing. I actually built this guitar. I mentioned my father was a collector of guitars, and you know we never had a ton of money, so he had kind of cheapo things that he had inherited over the years, and um, today I've inherited that gene, and the last few years I've been collecting cheap guitars and tinkering with them, and then building my own. You know, building them from kits and stuff. And so I wanted to do a 12 string. So I built this, and it plays, and it's okay. And so I was just recording on that, and made a little pattern. And it's like, oh, okay. And so I don't know if you picked up on this. Like, I'm playing the patterns, and there's a few layers on it,
Yeah,
and then it's reversed. So kind of halfway through the song, it kind of all stops, and then we're going to do it the other way and put a
yeah,
beat on it. And so, yeah, there's another cheesy production trick of reversing the sound. It sounds different. It sounds sometimes more interesting.
yeah.
There's a Boards of Canada thing for reversed, and backtracking and stuff is nothing new. And we could talk about the Beatles and stuff, but um, a lot of times, particularly with guitar, I use a lot of guitar on the records. They don't always sound like guitars when I'm done, but
Yeah.
I use a lot of them just for the atonal element or the moodiness that you get from being a roughly a pretty crap guitarist, but functional that I can at least make noises and then manipulate them, and hopefully it all holds together. So yeah, it is a real 12 string, and it's 12 string thing because it's who knows what this is in terms of music. It's a thing, and
Yeah.
it's built off of a pretty shoddy instrument.
Okay, that's interesting because there is there's a dissonance because you've got basically two guitar licks
Mhm.
sort of fighting each other a little bit. So is that the sort of the guitar lick and then the guitar lick reversed, or are you playing two different
No, I
progressions
mean
there?
that there's three or four I think different
Okay.
patterns. There's some are just more subtle than others, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is. There's also that tension, and I like this a lot that because I incorporate some live elements in everything,
Yeah.
it's the human heartbeat. I think it's I mentioned in a review or in another interview I did for this album, like it's okay. I feel like that tension between the very mechanical and very regimented, and then there's that's not the best note playing. There's a little bit of roughness,
Yeah.
and particularly on the guitar. It's only as good as I can do it, which isn't very good. Or a lo-fi element to the recording, or I walk around. I used to walk around quite a lot with a tape recorder to record found sounds, or the bird songs that you heard on the other record, or
Yeah.
who doesn't love to record a thunderstorm and use that. There's a thunderstorm on one of the tracks here too. um, and probably that's a new age, probably more stuff from my new age childhood, hearing all these nature sounds on tape. Anyway, yeah, I like it. I think it helps when you have a sound where like, hold on, that's not quite right. Maybe it is a little dissonant, or maybe it is a little at odds with something else going on. Sometimes by design, sometimes by accident.
Yeah. And again, you keep steering me, you keep queuing me up for my next comment. That dissonance in atonality, I think, sometimes can be mistaken for a mistake. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
it's really hard to do it intentionally and make it work. Because
Yeah.
because otherwise it really just jars and you've got two frequencies that simply don't live together. You
Mm.
can't use them. But that section in this song was like, again, my little nerd brain's just ping, ping, ping. This is amazing because it's just sort of it still all comes together in the right
Mm.
way. And like you said, the backmasking, that section just before the beat comes in,
Yeah.
it was just like, oh yeah, that's good. That's the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a 12 string just sounds wonderful anyway, right?
Yeah, of
It's such
course.
a nice, choral effect. So, or octave effect. And it's so, yeah, it's almost like, um, yeah, that shiny new toy or the new patch or the new keyboard. In this case, it was a new guitar sound that,
Yeah.
I needed to record and, try a few things and see what works together and maybe what doesn't work so well together. Um, I mentioned my collaborator, in England on our Echo Fisk album. We made a song where we had uh, I wanted to record some guitar licks on it, and again, I'm not a very good guitarist by any means, despite all the years I've been trying. Um, and I sent it back to him, and he was kind of like, "Yeah, well, this sounds." He described it something like a noir film from the '90s or something, and it was just like not what we were shooting for.
Right.
And it's like, okay, all right, I'll try again. And sometimes less is more, or sometimes, yes, being too careful with the instrument is like, well, why didn't you just program it?
Right.
Maybe the live element is what makes this unique, or makes it stand out a little bit more. Yeah, if you're just using the, the guitar sound on a DAW or on a keyboard and using that, it's going to sound everything perfectly placed, but not. It doesn't have that human heartbeat, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's get heavy again then, because track four, False Front. I actually laughed quite out loud the first time I heard this because you
Yeah,
tell us what you're going to do.
yeah.
The clue's in the name, the
Mm-hmm.
song comes in and then it stops and it decays out fully. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, hang on a minute. Is that the end of the last track then? Or is that this song? And then
Yeah,
you get that searing saw wave, like a chainsaw cutting through the pads.
yeah.
And then that breakbeat comes in. So again, we get a little bit heavier. And I wanted to tell you something here, mano a mano. I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a very sexy song, but not in a wholesome
Uh,
way. It's more in
yeah.
a take me around the back of 7-Eleven and do me up against the bins, and we've only
Oh
got five
goodness.
minutes. It's that kind of way.
Oh goodness. Yeah. Well, it is a not to be too crude here. It is a banger. I mean, it's definitely a song that is you're in and you're out.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the false front piece. Yeah, you got that cue, but also I like to try to well, back to the whole like what inspires a song. Sometimes I'm a note keeper. Like I will jot in notebooks. I've always done it. Little thoughts, little phrases. You never know where they're going to come up, um, when they'll help you out, whether it's a lyric or an idea, or just a thought that I want to pursue for a song. So false front, while this isn't necessarily a groundbreaking idea, like what is a false front? What does that mean to a person? So I try to pick titles that are evocative and maybe a little bit um, open to interpretation sometimes.
Right.
And or sometimes they're vague. Maybe you'll be like, oh gosh, I don't know what that means, but that's fine because then the listener can figure it out for themselves. So yeah, it is a pretty heavy chugger of a track, and I'm glad you enjoyed. It probably was another one that I had to mix down a few times. And
Right.
again, the label, when we mastered it, they were like, "Well, make sure you have this much headspace in the mix so that we can dynamically master this." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oopsies, I got to fix some of these because the demos are not gonna allow for that." This was one of them, and it's also fun. I'll put it this way, also, Kevin. Like sometimes it's just I get in the mood, like I'm going to make a really hard, really fast track. And then other times you're like, I'm feeling a little bit more introspective. I'm not going to use
Yeah.
any drums on this. So,
Yeah. And you do a good job of that too, right? Where drums come in and drums drop back out again, and then they come in sometimes in unexpected
Mhm.
places, which is again, okay, well, we'll talk about it now. Hopkins Hall,
Mhm.
you've got that, the percussion comes in, but then it sort of develops this strange, twangy kind of rubber band effect on it that takes you
Yeah.
into this space. Like, where's this going now? So
Mhm.
even if you're, like as I said earlier, right, 8 bars is that you should never get past 8 bars without doing something,
Yeah.
and it feels like that, and not in a, I suppose you could sort of in lesser hands, let's say, that could be distracting if it's changing too often.
Mhm.
But again, because you know where the center of the song is, and you always get back to the center, or we stay in the center, and everything else is just like kind of like the adornments on it.
Right.
It just sort of works, and I love the abrupt ending on that one too.
Oh,
It's got that
thanks.
really
Yeah.
kind of cool cut-off ending.
Yeah, that one, it's kind of an homage, and the name also says so Hopkins is to John Hopkins, so another electronic producer who I really admire because he marries very well the very aggressive techno with beautiful ambient. And so, if you ever check out his album Immunity, it's a wonderful one. And over the years, he's become uh, more psychedelic, I guess, a little bit more contemplative in his tunes. But there's always like his albums will have these chainsaw, like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I should be like grooving to this or like hiding under the bed kind of songs. um, and so this was an attempt to try to, emulate that style, probably totally unsuccessfully, but that's why it's called Hopkins Hall. In that, yeah, it has some very pretty sounds. It's got some very weird, squishy sounds, and uh, a hopefully a bit of a groove. Because
Yeah.
again, you got to hook somehow. The hook has to be there.
Yeah, and it's got that great bass part in it. With it's almost like when you get into because there's a couple of times where the notes go into that slightly higher register,
Mhm.
where it's almost not clipping, but it's got that staticky
Yes. Yeah.
quality to it that, again, because that's not overdone, because if that quality was on every note,
Mhm.
it would lose that impact. And I think that because it's just on that one note, again, for the nerd, is like, what is that? Oh,
Yeah.
that was cool. So I'll skip that back again. Oh yeah, I'd love to know how he's doing that. So
Mhm.
when how did you do that, Brian? What are you running that bass line through? Like, what kind of envelope are you
Oh,
shoving that through?
I
Do
don't
you know?
remember now. I mean,
Okay.
again, I think a lot of this is just kind of your personal style. Again, the rules on, when do you drop in the beat, when do you switch up the melody, it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
I don't have any, hard set rules. I think you just, again, you absorb the music, you know what you like and what works. And then hopefully you get better at doing it. And yeah, for sure, the first music I made was totally overblown. There was too much happening,
Yeah.
or maybe again, the first ambient thing I did was too boring and it didn't change enough. So you just kind of, converge on what works for you, and that's just down to, that's the track level, and to the, each sounds level, of how much tinkering do you let it go with, or how much do you just kind of let it run.
Yeah.
And yeah, like if everything was always changing, it was just like, "Oh, this is a noise," and it would be hard to comprehend, and not necessarily an enjoyable listen. But if you kind of keep some rules in there of like, okay, it's about time for a change. I think we should drop this beat in, or we should make this bass line flutter like that. Yeah, I can't speak to what exactly I did. What was the secret sauce, or the happy accident? Um,
Okay, well, let's talk about my two favorite songs on the album, Fight Fire and Unexpected Storm. And again,
mm,
you leave those to track 7 and 8.
mhm.
And again, to me, like when it gets there, it's like, wow. Because, I've already enjoyed everything up to this point, and now we're sort of getting up to another level. Fight Fire has kind of got this. It sounds like something out of a horror movie almost. It's got that sort of menace to there's
Yeah.
a sort of a clicking quality in that percussion at the top. And then
Mhm.
you've got those arpeggiated parts that come in, and it feels like there's almost a complete EQ shift where it sort of discombobulates you a little bit. Like I
Sure.
love that because it takes you out of your
Mm.
comfort zone. It's like, I don't know where this is going now. And then you get that big vocal thing in the middle.
Yeah.
Super, super cool track.
Oh, thanks. I probably was listening to the Prodigy a bit. So there is an
I'd
ambient,
written
or I mean,
that's what I'd written
yeah,
down. I
yeah.
wrote down it sounds like the Prodigy. Excellent.
Yeah, there is an aggressive element there. I mean, certainly Fight Fire, maybe is evocative of Firestarter, their big song, but and it's not a ripoff of Prodigy. It's not, but there's that influence, I guess.
Yeah.
I really got into techno and electronic music in the late '90s and early 2000s, and so that was what I was listening to. It was like Prodigy, Underworld, Orbital, Fluke. Big Beat was kind of a thing, but just like Prodigy, like they evolved quite a bit from like kind of like kiddie rave to
Yeah.
like aggro, and now they're like, the metal heads favorite techno band, because
Yeah.
they're raw, and you go to a concert, it's going to be loud and screaming and guitars and stuff. So um yeah, so this one is a little bit loud and screaming and guitars, but the I don't know if I should say where the vocal came from because that's an uncleared sample. And, and then no, it's a manipulated sample, so it's okay. And also, I think just to put this out there, like, when you're using samples, I find it so fascinating how bands like Prodigy or Orbital or Chemical Brothers or whatever would, find these obscure records and just sample a groove and then
Yeah.
chop it up. And it's like, now we can figure that out. AI can tell you where did that come from. But for years and years, you thought, wow, they're amazing. And it's like, I had no idea they didn't even make this sound.
Yeah.
I think when Pete and I reviewed Radiohead's Kid A, I was a little disappointed to learn that some of the coolest sounds on there were, sampled from some record. I was like, oh, I thought they made that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sample to create songs, like, anything went. It was kind of the Wild West for early electronica, and amazingly transformative. Where, to the point where you don't even know where it came from. Like,
Of course.
are you familiar with the band The Orb?
No.
Okay, well,
I
anyway,
don't. Well, maybe I'm not. I don't
well,
think so. Not off the top of my head.
they had a song "Little Fluffy Clouds," which was sort of,
Oh yeah, I know
early.
that song. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I know that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, what were the skies like when you were a kid? And they, anyway, there's a Ricky Lee Jones sample, and she wasn't so thrilled with that. I don't think they cleared that. And the drum beat, Pat Metheny plays guitar on that. Can you believe it? There's a Steve Reich counterpoint melody that he's Pat Metheny playing. So anyway, all these really disparate samples, and Harry Nilsson, I think, is the drum beat. And so for years and years,
Okay.
the Orb guy was like, I can't tell you where that's come. People's heads will explode. Well, eventually they found out it was Harry Nilsson. Like, gracious. Like, now this is on like this weird trip hop, ambient house track.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Fight Fire. That was a fun one. And then the other one, Unexpected Storm. I'm pretty proud of that one because that one has really morphed from where I started to where it ended up.
Right.
Um,
It's got. So what I'd written down for this one is I think it's probably the only track on the album that when I was listening to, I thought you could add vocals to that. Like that's one song that would take a vocal because of I think maybe because it is more, and this is not to imply anything else, is unstructured, but there's a structure to it that would support a vocal and not necessarily like a verse chorus, but with some sort of vocal line in there. And I'll tell you, man, the drums on that song are just chef's kiss. So I wanted to ask, was that played and was it played MIDI and then recorded, or was it a real kit, or was it all programmed? Because it sounds real.
It is absolutely 100% real,
Yeah,
and it
okay.
is performed by a real live drummer, a fantastic drummer named Jesse Sprinkle.
Okay.
And Jesse is a recording musician, and he's been in many bands. And I reached out to him and asked him years ago, because I knew a band that he was in the 90s, and he was up in upstate New York. And so I kind of reached out to him when I was over there. And he was like, yeah. I said, would you record some drum grooves, just jam for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and I want to use it for sampling because, yeah, I've got drum samples galore and program beats, but I really would like live because there's that element of swing, and
Yeah.
the dynamics you get from a live kit, you can't match it.
Yeah.
So Jesse was kind enough to agree, and the loop that he did, it's so in key, like, or so in tempo. There's no, I didn't have to shift anything.
Right.
It just like he's a metronome. Um, and yeah, and the song is all the better for it because those drums, the stuff that just the fills that he does keeps it interesting. And
Yeah.
then we did a little bit of cut up, myself and my co-producer on that track, Dave Hall. Again, he helped me out with that. We did a little bit of choppy chop, but it's still the actual drums. We didn't put any real effects on it or anything. Yeah, in terms of like, is this a more conventional song? I think it's a little more happy, a little bit more has motion and movements that you could imagine that, yeah, a vocal could work. And then there's
Yeah, or it could be a single. I mean, you're talking about the fills there too, because that's big snare fill
Mhm.
into the breakdown with those beautiful dry crisp hats.
Mhm.
That's kind of the moment on the album for me. That's the bit where you're like, because I always think about songs in terms of moments. Is there some one very defining thing that happens
Uh,
in this piece? And when
mhm.
that snare fill comes in, then you just go to the hats, and
Yeah.
because it sounds so good, and there's so much space that you've left in there.
Mhm.
That's like that turnaround into the second. It's like, ah, man, come on, that's just perfect. And those.
Sure.
And the thing that tipped me off that I thought probably it was real is
Mhm.
I don't think those snare rolls that he's doing. I mean, maybe people have got samples of those now and you can program those, but they
Yeah.
sounded good, man. It's like that sounds like a real guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesse's a fantastic drummer,
Yeah,
and it was a pleasure to work and have him agree to grace my little album and
yeah.
make it better for it.
Okay, so the last three songs, like I said, to me, Dreamt Together, Insomnia Lullaby, another great title, by the way, and Fleeting Thoughts. That feels like it's sort of there is a sort of a mini suite
Mhm.
within the album there because you've got, you're talking about, you've this idea of the internal and sort of, what happens after you sleep and consciousness and all those types of things.
Mm.
Is that where it was that deliberate? Was that something that you thought, okay, well, I've got three things I want to say here but they're related?
I think, yeah, they are related. I mean, thematically, you're right. You're spot on. I think also the fact that they're just largely and probably entirely beatless. So it's sort
Yeah,
of the ambient come down at the end. It's a little bit daring to do, particularly for an album like this, where well, okay, so the label I'm working with, EC Underground, it's eclectic, but this they tend to have more up tempo, more
right.
dance oriented music. Um, when I was shopping this record around, submitting it to the labels, as like it doesn't really fit in an ambient world because there's too many beats and certainly hard tracks that probably
Right.
aren't appropriate, and it doesn't really fit in a dance category too because you've got tracks like this. So I guess the brave or daring thing is to spend three tracks coming down, sort of
Right.
to dreamland, and again, I think about the album as cohesive in that you have ebbs and flows, and sometimes there's the scary middle. I think how you start and end an album is really key. Of
Yeah.
course, are you going to does it capture interest, and then does it hold up to repeated listens? Um, and so yeah, three tracks at the end, you could be like, well, maybe energy is fading. Somebody might not dig that. They might be like, okay, he's kind of winding down. Where's the energy that was inherent in this? But I think there's enough ebb and flow through the album anyway that it's not like bang, 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 and then stop.
Yeah.
It's you've got loud and soft moments, quiet bits, and space throughout. That it's hopefully feels like a more subtle build. And how you structure an album, where the tracks go, is always intriguing to think about when we're reviewing the records. Um, but also like when you're making it yourself, like, okay, how does this flow? And
Yeah.
does a different track order give you a different feel? Sure. I think so.
But you couldn't, I don't think you could put those three songs. First of all, they wouldn't really work out of sequence
Hmm.
because like you said, it gets more into that sort of abstract soundscape area.
Yeah.
And they have to go together. And then so if they're going to be together, they sort of have to be at the end too, right? So I think that they make the choice for you. And what I love about Insomnia Lullaby, apart from the brilliantly ironic title, which I just think is super, it feels to me like the first half is the person trying to get past their insomnia and try to get to sleep. And then the second half almost feels like they're in a REM sleep dream. Where so
Okay.
they're almost like they're running and running, but no matter how fast they get, they can't outrun.
Yeah.
It's got that quality, that dreamlike quality to me.
Well, that's again an astute observation. I don't want to overload you with music, but I also record I have another guy. It's called Gears in the Rain, and this one is much more ambient and
Okay.
even more so than what we've been talking about today. And so I made this mix a couple years ago. Well, actually, I did a couple mental health consumer ones too that were kind of beatless, long form ambient, and the idea being that um, well, the albums that I did were kind of like a whole night, a night out. What's happening in midnight, and how do your thoughts progress as it gets later and later, or earlier
Yeah.
and earlier. And anyway, the Gears in the Rain stuff I was doing a couple years ago um, was trying to create an album for a sleep cycle. So if you've had kids, kind of know how when they wake up and what's a sleep cycle like, or in your own life, when do you go into REM sleep or deep sleep or whatever. So sleep cycles are of various durations, and I was trying to score this, and keeping it interesting, but also keeping it enough that you could put it on in your headphones and go to bed to it.
Right.
So some of the sounds that you're hearing in those last tracks, and particularly Insomnia Lullaby, are kind of remnants of that attempt to make it
Okay.
music for sleeping. And one other thing that I'll throw out there is, years ago, I contributed an album or a song to a sleep concert. Have you ever heard of those?
No.
I don't know how often the people do them anymore, but it was this guy put on this event, overnight event where you'd invite people to come and they would listen to music, but they would bring their sleeping bags and fall asleep to it. So it would be a case where you needed like a continuous score, 8 hours of music, but nothing that would be so obtrusive that you couldn't sleep to it. So this whole sleep concert was like a happening, I guess. It kind of an event. I don't know. I don't know if I would want to do that. Would you want to do that? Go sleep with a bunch of strangers listening to weird music?
Absolutely not.
No, but nonetheless,
but a cool idea.
Yeah, but the idea being like, what kind of music would you listen to that you could use as sort of fodder for dreaming, and or drift off to? And we've talked a lot about what music means to people and how it's you listen to my album at night, or there's albums that evoke a certain time of day or season or whatever, or just when did you buy it, memories, right? That's super tied to the music.
Yeah.
I think also music can be very powerful to be calming as well as activating. And some of my best nights of sleep are when I put the headphones on and I start listening to music, and then you wake up 3 hours later and it's still on, but it turned on something or turned off something in my brain to allow me to get into deep sleep. So that's my little thing there. I'm not trying to put anyone to bed with this record, but because hopefully it's still interesting sounds. But you could imagine that that suite of 3 tracks there could be stretched out or part of a even broader thing to be more of the meditative or relaxing ambient.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I would say, just as a final observation or note on the album as a whole, first of all, it is one of those albums that I can't imagine ever listening to just a song. When I'm listening to this, I'm going to listen to the album because you sort of have to get the most out of it.
Okay.
Because there's so much rhythmic and structural and percussive complexity in these songs that I was thinking about it. Each track's probably got at least 10 to 20 different melodic, rhythmic, or sonic ideas alone in there. And what I was off the back of that, I was thinking, man, that's a lot of writing. Like, because if I'm writing a song, typically I write 3 to 4 minute, it's kind of pop rocky kind of, and that's what I kind of write. I've really only got to write a verse and a chorus, bridge, maybe a bit of a pre-chorus. There might be a bit of bridge in there, maybe a bit of business at the top and the bottom. But really, I'm only writing 2 or 3 things, and then there's going to be a little bit of improvisation around those. But for listening to this album, the amount of material that you have to come up with, it just absolutely staggers me. It blows my mind.
Well, it always starts somewhere. I mean, if you are a singer or a songwriter or whatever, whether you're composing on, piano or a guitar or with vocals or whatever, it starts somewhere and then you build up. And it's the same way with electronic based music too. You just, sometimes there's the bass line and then you build up from that, and it can for sure snowball, but I try to be cognizant that too much going on is a bad thing, but keep it interesting. That it does reward the second listen or the headphone listening. Make things, put them in your headspace such that, oh, okay, I didn't hear that the first time, or oh, that's an interesting sound that maybe it's attention getting but not too jarring. So there's and again in a DAW you have unlimited tracks you could use. How many you choose to is up to you. And sometimes simple works better. Sometimes you do need 20 or more sounds.
Yeah.
Maybe not all at once, but over the course of a track, things are popping in and out. And some people, I'll be honest, like some people will be very specific. Like every sound gets its own track. Yours is the track for the hi-hat only. Yeah. And here's this track for the snare. And fine. And that's great. You can, and then you can, EQ them to your heart's content. But for me, I often will put multiple things together. If I find
Okay.
a loop that works and it has a beat on top of it, it might be together. And so probably a nightmare to master, but um, but it becomes a more but kind of more organically mixed, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. It's more intrinsic that way, where yeah, you could have built it up with the bass and the drums and the keyboard as separate, or okay, they're all together and now they live together, and that's going to be a motif that runs through it, irreseparable. So yeah, I don't know. Again, it's just my own personal style and my own limitations, I guess, of how the music fits together.
Well, let's start wrapping things up because I think that's
Please.
again you're giving me a perfect lead into my final comment. I think that there is a parallel with Tom Petty, and this is the Tom Petty project, in
Mm-hmm.
that the music that you make sounds authentically like you and what you want to say. It doesn't sound like you're chasing sounding like this or sounding like that. And I mentioned you hear that Prodigy element, and there might be some Chemical Brothers, but that's only because of the style of music it is. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
your influences are always going to come through,
Sure.
but it just sounds like you. And I don't know. Maybe there's a whole universe out there of this type of music that I'm gonna get into. But
Mm-hmm.
as an entry point for me, I'm so glad it was you because I
Oh,
enjoy
thanks.
your voice and I enjoy the way that you communicate these ideas.
Well, thanks very much. That's a wonderful compliment, and again, that's all you can ask for in this world. Your whatever you make and you send out there connects. And yeah, is a creative that your creation is appreciated, because we do it for ourselves for
Yeah.
sure, but because we enjoy it, but we also do it for someone to get a bit of that joy or a different sort of feeling too. So thanks for that. Yeah, and um, a pleasure to chat with you, and thanks for indulging me. I hope that listeners will give it a chance. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of overlap with, say, Tom Petty stylings, but musically, we're coming from the same place, I guess. That
Yeah.
trying to do your best to express how you feel, and maybe sometimes it's more successful than not in my case, uh, but yeah, it is a lot of fun, and yeah, we'll see where it goes, see what
Yeah.
happens.
Well, tell people if they do want to check it out and they want to enjoy it. And of course, folks, there will be links in the episode notes, so go check that out. But Brian, where can people find you online on Bandcamp? Where do people get a hold of your music?
Sure. Yeah. So, Mental Health Consumer is the name of the artist, and you can search on Bandcamp for that. It's just Mental Health Consumer at bandcamp.com. EC Underground, I want to give them a big shout out. So my album is cross listed there, so you can pick it up from them or pick it up from me. And then this should be on December 5th. So coming up tomorrow, anyway, when we're recording this, should be on all streaming platforms. So that'll be pretty exciting to see a different reach. I don't know if it's a broader reach, but a different reach than I'm used to. Um, we already mentioned the Honest and Unmerciful record review podcast. So check that out if you're more interested in the rock side of things than the weirdo experimental electronic we've been talking about today. And then the net label. So Believe in Billy Records is the name of my net label. It's on archive.org. So archive.org details Believe in Billy Records will get you there. And I can give you these links if you want them. But yeah, a whole plethora of stuff, most of which I've produced, but some stuff I've done with Pete Nestor and with others over the years. Yeah, that's plenty to share, I think. Yeah.